Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. So if we just look at this chapter 18, the yoga of liberation, we've gone through a few topics now, and it started with explaining who is a tyagi and a sannyasi. It actually starts from the very refined part, and then it brings it down to the very practicalities. So sannyasi, who's a tyagi, first of all? Anyone? Okay.
Relinquishes the fruit of the action.
And then if that's the case, who's a sannyasi? Doesn't matter what dress you are wearing. Who's the sannyasi? It's an extension of the tyagi. So if you're going to drop the fruit of action, that's the starting point, because our mind's always rushing to the future. We don't see the wood for the trees. Our mind's always going, running on. I've got to do this, I've got to do that. This is important, that's important. Instead of actually thinking what you've got to do in life. So the sannyasi is, anyone? We all did this. Just to extend the tyagi, the value of a tyagi. What else will cause you an issue, Vidya?
He renounces the world. He doesn't take part in the material actions of the world, sannyasi. And he does more of tapas, which is his practice. I mean, my understanding is that tyagi relinquishes, but he still expects, he's still very much in the world, and he doesn't relinquish the fruit of action, whereas the sannyasi relinquishes the fruit of action. There's a gradation.
Okay, so you've got all the constituents there. So if you think about it, the tyagi, when you've got a lot of desires, you're able to think, okay, if you're on your spiritual path, you're able to think, I can drop the fruit of action. Gradually, you can train yourself that with a lot of desires. But slowly, in the context we're talking about here in this chapter, it's different in different places. But when you've got a lot of desires pushing you into activity, the tyagi can drop the fruit of action. As you progress and you become with less desires, your mind is calmer. You're able to sit, reflect, think on the higher values rather than be totally disturbed by the world. But yet, nevertheless, you've got desires backing you. Because you've got desires backing you, can be conscious that, yeah, I do have to pursue these desires, but I can pursue them with a bit of objectivity, more of an objectivity, a dispassion. So sannyasi has that dispassion. there's a disinterested interest in the world. So they're still very much in the world in a sense, but their focus is on something higher, not just dropping the fruit. They're tuned in and then not governed by their backlog of that ego, that desire pushing them. Though they know that there's the desires are there and they've got to pursue them, but they're not governed by that thrust any longer. They've refined themselves. There's a calmness in mind. So this is like the things that you've got to raise your bar towards, you know, slowly dropping the fruit of action. And then in later, as he goes on, he starts to talk. We talked about sattva, rajas, and tamas, the characteristics of our personalities, and our whole spiritual evolution is to be vigilant, to drop our tamas by pitching up something higher. Something higher, we mean more universal, pervasive, so that it's for a bigger picture, a bigger cause. So whatever your vasanas or the swadharmic nature may be, you can use that to your advantage, but you've got to pitch up on something bigger, an ideal, something beyond your own selfish interest. And then your community is something beyond that community self-centeredness. You see, you might be pitching up beyond your own interest, but then your community is involved in something and you get embroiled in that. Or your nation's involved in something, you get embroiled in that. No, you stand back. It's like the quarrels between families, or your children, you know, watching children, then families, nations. You've got to stand back out of it. You train yourself. You're not the custodian of anybody else's conscience but your own. So then he gives the whole personality chart, which is that which helps us refine ourselves. Sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. Knowledge, action, actor, dhruti. Steadfastness, happiness, sukham, renunciation, which we did in the beginning of the chapter. So these are just like we're reiterating, because it's very poignant for our own development. And who is that? Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. Who are that gradation of personality? Where do you fall into those categories, where you can lift yourself out of it? It's never by birthright. It's always to do with one's own self. How can I lift myself out of certain traits, personalities? Or if I've got a big temperament in one, how can I refine it? It doesn't matter which temperament you are predominantly. What matters is that you're raising your sattva in any one of those predicaments, so you optimize the scenario in whatever the predicament you're in. There's no goods, no bads. It's just what your vasanas are, you've got to utilize effectively, so you don't escape. You've got to do karma, do more karma. You've got to think a bit, do more of that, if that's your predominance. Whatever it be, if you're a devotional, emotional person, serve that. You can serve it blindly, but then be vigilant in your mind to up it. So now we're on through karma, action, bhakti, devotion, jnana, knowledge, and meditation one, which is the Brahman. So it brings us up to where we are. So 45 to 58, and we're on 51. We more or less covered last week, but we will start off here because we didn't read the commentary. So is attuning us to get to that meditation and beyond, tuning us the traits which we need to tune into, the stages we need to develop. So before we go ahead on 51, anybody, any questions? 51. I have the recording video. You want to
I
chant?
can chant.
Okay.
Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto Rityatmanam niyamya cha Shabdadhin vishayam tyaktva Ragadveshodvyudasya cha.
Samuel, you could read the verse.
Verse 51. Endued with a very pure intellect, having controlled self through firmness, relinquished sound and other sense objects, renounced love and hatred, and
It suggests, when he goes and, it suggests there's a few more there, which we've got to think about by now in the ancient temple. And what else is there that I need to do to get this pure intellect to transcend you? So you've got a spiritual pursuit, pure intellect. There's subtle and gross intellect pertaining to the world, but the subtle intellect, that buddhi, susukshma buddhi, that intellect which is always making that distinction, everything in the world, something out of the world, which you don't actually know, which is the problem. So we make all these funny things up and rituals and various things that we do in the world to say that we're religious, spiritual, etc. But what are we actually doing? What have we got to refine ourselves with? So it's actually, what we're doing is we're just refining ourselves in the sense that the cloud covering the sun, we're just making the cloud rain so it dissolves away so we can see the sun. Essentially, that's what we're doing, because we don't know what that sun is. So we're just dissolving our vasanas, our desires. So with a very pure intellect, we attune ourselves. 51, 52, and 53 is doing that. We're preparing ourselves for that meditation. So the last stages of the development. So having controlled with firmness, dhruti. So it's like having self-control, meaning having control of your mind. You can, if you have control of your mind, you've got control of your senses. So whatever is entering you, you make a distinction. Do I want that or not? Is that relevant or not? Is it necessary or not? So relinquishing the sense objects. So the five senses, you're not tantalized by things. You don't have, it's not that you don't contact sense objects. You enjoy everything, but you just have the right value for it. That's all. You don't have the craving. And you remember astutely, everything that you do in the world is like propping up your body, mind, intellect, and ego. So there's got to be something mentally at the backdrop of your mind, the subtle intellect, projecting, having a different ideal than just to gain the props of the world. Remember this quote by Ramadita, iron and gold can only buy iron and gold. What do we mean by that? Iron and gold can buy iron and gold, nothing else. What do we mean?
It's finite, it's limited.
So what is that finite, limited? What's iron and gold doing? What does he mean, iron and gold? It's finite, limited, yeah. What do we normally relate?
Very much a synopsis of the material world we inhabit, the functional use of iron, the monetary use of gold, and the decorative use of art.
So you can buy anything in the world. You can get anything for your senses. You can fulfill your senses with iron and gold. That's how it is, if you get what I mean, what you just said. You can fulfill your sound, sight, you get satiated for a moment, but it can't fix your emotions or thoughts. It might temporarily get you a fix. It's a useful commodity of exchange. It gets you the fix to move you on the way. Often in medicine, they give you drugs to, in some occasions, without going into with the parameters of this example, they give you a drug to kickstart you to be actually making yourself healthy. But if you rely on that drug, it can make you ill. So it's actually just a kickstart to suppress something, to allow you to fight off that which is not so comfortable. But so there's no problem with iron and gold. You can use it, but it can't do the rest of it. You've got to do the rest of it yourself. So it's endued with very pure intellect, having control of the self through firmness, dhruti, relinquishing sound in other sense. So remember, we can, it's just a control over your senses. And to control your senses, you've got to not be just running by your likes and dislikes, being swayed by your likes and dislikes all the time. I like this, I don't like this, I don't want to do this, I don't. You've got to make more of an informed decision, which is objective, something beyond your likes and dislikes, making your choices, the bigger picture, then the universal picture, then to get to that truth. What's that universality? You've got to investigate that. It takes time to change. But the moment you're stuck with certain likes and dislikes, raga dvesha, if it's not intelligently controlled or directed, you're open to perish. So you've got to direct your attachments and aversions. You've got to disconnect from them. Pitch up something bigger. Any opportunity you get time to do this, you home in on it. Doing what you ought. Taking that time to contemplate, reflect. So you can never give up anything. You've just got to take it up. So endued with pure intellect, because you know the limitations of the world, and that's not what you're after. So a sharp, so you gain control first over your physical, your mental, and if you you train your intellect to pervade over those. Let's read it. Let's read.
Verses 51, 52, and 53 enumerate 12 divine values. Spiritual evolution is marked by one's attunement with these values. Vidya Vishuddhya, Vishuddhaya, Yukta, Yukta, endued with a very pure intellect. Clarity of thought is the main artery to self-knowledge. With a clear intellect, the seeker fixes self-realization as the goal in life. It sets the direction for the mind and body to follow suit.
So self-knowledge gains a clarity of intellect. How does it do that? How does it help? So clarity of intellect gains, it's like two pedals in fact. How does that happen?
I guess when your desires are channelized towards self-realization, there's a direction. It's not that they're running into different places. So the intellect is pure because it's directed into just one, and that's something higher. Yeah.
Just no wandering all over the place. So the more you do that, the more steadfast you become. The more steadfast you become, the more you can do that. The more knowledge you gain, the more you fuel that backing, the more easy it becomes to get more bigger the clarity of the bigger picture in relation to what you're doing. So you become less interested in the nitty-gritty and want the...
Exactly, yeah. And also, I liked what you said about likes and dislikes, because I think sometimes when we have likes and dislikes, the mind, sometimes we don't get what we want, or there's always that yes and no, good and bad. So if we direct our focus on something higher, which transcends these likes and dislikes, then the intellect is pure. It's not in the duality of pain and
rises above it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So when you're in an aeroplane and you look down and you see the city, you fly over, you may even recognize some of the landmarks when you're seeing, you come into London from being wherever you're going into. You can see all the landmarks, you recognize everything, you know about it, but you have nothing to do with it. Yeah. It's like almost your objective to it. You can see the whole lot. You're very much part of it, but you're not a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see children squabbling, you see the squabble, you feel their pain, but you don't get engaging into their fight because you understand they're fighting about chalk pieces. Are you going to get into the middle and fight about chalk pieces when you've got your focus on the higher?
So clarity of thought, you're using it in the sense of perspective. You have a greater perspective.
Yes, and it could be in the world, which makes it unselfish, and when it's towards the self, which is universal, beyond that, it gives you that clarity that you up yourself from looking at the material, physical. You're looking at the spiritual aspect of life. You get clarity, perspective. Yes. Let's go to the next.
Having controlled self through firmness. When the intellect pursues a high ideal with determination, the mind comes under control. It no longer craves for the material world. The seeker is then able to direct his feelings and emotion also towards the ideal. Practice self-control at the mental level.
Remember, this comes all over chapter 2 and 3. So if you put the verse of right action, it's 25 to 30 actually, the technique, blueprint of right action. And if you put the verses, I think it's 63, 64 of chapter 2, you have to check that actually. Well, we'll check it first. But the verse on self-control, or a couple of verses, you put them together, meaning your mind is engaged in a higher value. So your intellect pitches up a higher value. Your mind, if it's feeling emotions, focuses on that higher value, enabling you to act in the present action with clarity of purpose. That you don't get pushed off onto other things. No matter what your body is doing, no matter what your mind's doing, you've got to focus on something bigger. These are material things, they're temporary. This is to clarify your thoughts. So having controlled the self through firmness, dhruti, you might have great ideas and initiatives, but if we don't put them in practice with consistency of purpose, that shraddha towards something bigger, that devotion towards the self, that mumukshatva, that desire to liberate, be free, then it just disintegrates. It's a feeling, an emotion. You feel good about yourself for a minute, and that's about it. You feel that you got on the right path. That's about it. It's like having a book in front of you, but you never open the book. You know that that book's got the best knowledge, so that when you hold it in your hand, you feel that you're that. But if you don't open the book and digest the knowledge, get the book to stimulate, get it out of within you and become that. It's as good as just holding the book in your bag all the time or under your arm. It doesn't serve your evolution. It's got to be consistent. What's the next one? Shabdadan Vishayam Tyaktva. Having relinquished sound and other sense objects. Sam.
Just a quick one. Sorry, I just wanted to ask about about the having controlled self through firmness. So it's basically saying that you need to be consistent with your practices. You need to be determined, keep going, keep going, right? Is that what it's saying? That's what's coming through to me in a way.
If you don't have that consistency of purpose, you've actually not, you will naturally gain that. You see, if you have a routine habit of doing something, you naturally do it by default. Can you imagine getting up and not brushing your teeth after whenever you do it? Or not doing certain things? As a matter of fact, you do it. It keeps you into the next stage of whatever you've got to do. Can you imagine you don't study in the morning every day? Reflect. You might be able to imagine that. But hopefully you come a time where you can't imagine that you wouldn't. To have that in your mind first thing. So can you imagine? So if it's not consistent, whatever is consistent by default will come in with its power. So all the negative habits come in if you're not consistently established with dhruti. Dhruti is that firmness, that consistency of purpose to that higher. It can be material too, but you mean to that, in this context, that higher purpose, that which gets you to that meditation and beyond. Consistency of purpose. So that self-control is required, and that becomes second nature. It's mentioned like self-control is like a fear, a terrible thing, but it's actually becomes a pleasure if by default it happens. Okay, put it in a gross example. If you don't brush your teeth, it feels absolutely awful. That's just a very base thing. If you don't put in the effort to evolve yourself out of this transient perceptions, emotions, and thoughts of your world, that's also feeling awful. So when you get that in your mind, you get onto, right, I've got to do this. I don't want to be stuck in this quagmire of mess. I've got to get out of it. Let's go to the next. It's okay.
Thank you. Having relinquished sound and other sense objects. With intellect and mind set on a high path, the body and senses drop their sensuality. Relinquish their craving for sensual indulgence. The seeker practices self-control at the physical level as well.
So, raga, having relinquished sound and other senses. So this idea of raga dvesha going beyond your likes and dislikes. If you're indulgent, it's very difficult to prevent that. So it's like everything in moderation to be able to make the choice in the first place to pursue it. And it's never that you don't contact your senses. It's just an intelligent method of doing it. If you deprive yourself, it's as bad as being indulgent. So this is a good middle path to it. Let's go there. That's actually the next one. Raga Dvesha. Tasya.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing about this one. It basically it's saying that in order to be able to manage your senses or have senses controlled, you should, well, the intellect and mind should be set on a high path. So your mind has to be set on a high path and your intellect for the senses to be under control, right?
Yeah. If you don't have a higher path, you don't have anything to feed you with an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. So simply withdrawing from your sense, things that you don't feel you want to chase anymore, but you've got a little bit of a craving for it. If you don't have any understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, or a higher value to pitch up on with that understanding, till that becomes you, very much you. People go on diets, or people have addictions to various things. They can't move themselves off it because there's not a higher value in place which they can channelize towards, and B, there's not sufficient understanding to digest that, to actually feel that this is really productive for me, not to be doing that, but to actually be doing this. So that phases out. But if the mind's constantly going towards the values which are disturbing you and distracting you and you're craving, that gets thicker and thicker with druti, consistency, a lower value. It becomes almost impossible to get out of. It's spiraling you down. So this self-control has understanding and knowledge backing it. Has a focus on a bigger idea.
Thank you. Having abandoned likes and dislikes. A disciplined seeker is no longer governed by attraction and aversion. He becomes relatively free from desires, vasanas. He acts through intellectual conviction rather than like and dislike of his mind.
So, what are the things? Endued with a very pure intellect. So you need that clarity. This is at this stage, self-knowledge and clarity is there. You've got a firmness. You have self-control, an understanding, a discipline. It becomes second nature. You're not governed by your likes and dislikes. But none of this means that you're not in your world participating. It's mental. Visha, did you have something? So let's go. 52.
Viviktasya vilagvasi yatapakhaya manasah dhyana yoga paro nityam vairagyam samupashritah.
Isha, if you could read that verse.
Verse 52, living in solitude, eating but a little, with speech, body and mind controlled, ever engaged in yoga of meditation, endued with dispassion.
So
The verse continues.
So Vivek the Seva, living in solitude, eating a little, speech, body, mind controlled, engaged in yoga, meditation, ensued with dispassion. These are all the qualities, all the things to bear and also that happen as a matter of fact. So living in solitude it doesn't mean that you take yourself out and, away from everybody. It's a mental attitude. It's where you yourself will find an environment which is quiet to pursue whatever you need to do, to be able to meditate. And you can only do that when you've got few desires or to none. It just means you're not dependent upon external objects in your life to disturb you. So you've got to choose a place. Say when you do your study or your reflection or in the morning, you choose a place with the least disturbances. Morning is generally that. Morning time. Very few people awake at 4 to 6. Nobody's going to come and disturb you. And if anybody is, you don't need to be disturbed by them. So you choose a place, a time, an environment. Eating but a little. It's not the rule, but the more introvert you become, the more until you need eat less. So it's not particularly what you eat, though that's also important. So it's not what you eat which makes you the philosopher, but it kind of is sort of related, because the sort of things you eat, put in your body, actually don't bother you if they're more cleaner. So it enables you to get on with what you're supposed to do. It doesn't irritate you. So the more introvert you are, the less indulgent you become. And in that less indulgent, you consume less of it's not necessarily meaning, it doesn't necessarily mean food in your mouth. It's food for your senses. Less you need in terms of visuals or things to tantalize you to make you stay happy or satiated. The less you need in terms of all of your life, the senses, your smell, what you hear, you've got it already channelized on that higher focus. So you're less distracted. You need less to preoccupy yourself because your thoughts on resting on something higher. You don't need to indulge. Indulging actually is sickly. It's nice to have a little bit of whatever you like, but too much is, yeah, whatever it is, maybe physical, you wear, maybe what you take in your senses. So it's on all levels, what you hear, you control and moderate it. There's speech, body, mind control. You don't need to listen to too much of people's gossips. You keep your emotions in check. You don't need to get involved in too much of the grosser values of things going on. Keep yourself that elbow room to see things from a bigger perspective. Channelize. Just go in where you need. So nityam, engaged in the yoga of meditation. So meditation, in the sense, as much as seated, is a constant practice of open eye meditation. So it's not just sitting there with a mantra or something like that. It's every moment of your life. You've got at the backdrop of your mind, you're remembering a reality, you're projecting something bigger, more universal. At the back of every action, perception, emotion, or that is generally that feeling. That's what it is. That contemplation. So it's that, we talked about it before, synchronization. We were talking about it before, in fact. So you've got a memory that I am Atma Brahman. Abhyasa, practice. Abhyasa is practice. I am Atma Brahman. When you're doing something, nobody needs to know. You don't need to do all your things and say, hey, I'm Atma Brahman. It's just back in your mind. I am Atma Brahman. One of the aphorisms, yeah.
When I look at these 12 qualities we're looking at this morning, you could align it simply with growing old, with dying, couldn't you? You lose your appetite for senses, you become more solitary and things like that. Is it? What's the fundamental difference between this and just growing old?
Because one is you've satiated your desires, and the other one is you're incapacitated to fulfill those desires. So you can't, so you just give it up. Or you just can't be bothered anymore. Or that, you just can't. But you might have it mentally running in your mind. I've heard one or two people at the end of their life say, I wish I'd done this. I should have done this, or I feel my life wasn't. I've heard that. I think, what? But they didn't feel that they did what they needed to do. So there's a difference. So perhaps some things change with time because you get a bigger understanding. And that's the maturity of that. But certain desires don't go with time and age. They're still in the back of your mind, but you're just not in the capacity to do it anymore. So in the foolishness of youth, we wasted it. Now we can't do it. So if you can do it, do it. You need to do it. Young or old. Mm-hmm.
Which is why Swamiji always says, it's the youngsters who should be learning this, because we elderly people, so to speak, people who are older, have already wasted our lives. But basically, this knowledge is not so much about growing old, but it's about way of life. So if you learn earlier, you know how to deal with life, how to suppress desires, or not to suppress desires, how to overcome desires. How to be in control of life rather than life controlling you, rather than the world controlling you. But again, we've all got it wrong, so we started late, but better late than never. So
better the minute you know it, start working on it.
My mom used to say, like, in the night, if I say, like, oh, I wish I had a cup of ice cream, she'll make sure, like, I have the ice cream. Why? Because there's this saying, my grandparents, everybody used to say, like, whatever you desire, you do it now, here and now. Like, you don't have to be born again just to have that cup of ice cream. So much to say. It was said on a lighter vein, but basically there was a bigger philosophy behind it. Don't desire anything, because that's going to come back to you to become vasanas. And when you study this, it makes so much sense of what they were saying then.
So don't wait for anything. Do it. Get it done and dusted. Even if it doesn't work out the way you want it to work out, but just you put your efforts to do it. And where you don't want to do it, fine. You've grown out of it. So yes, some time passes and you've grown out of your childish desires. But if there are those stubborn swadharmic prarabdha vasanas which are remaining, you've got to really tackle those so that they're fulfilled. And there's nothing like getting it done now. So anytime your mind procrastinates, remember, bring it back. Come on, let's get on with it. However difficult it is. However, better to die in swadharma was our verse, without merit, than paradharma. Well done. It's about fulfilling the vasanas so you can see that truth. So this I am Atma Brahma in all that you do. It's not a mechanical repetition. It's an awareness. If it becomes mechanical, stop. Rethink what you're doing. Then get that ascharya back into you, that wonderment. I am. Wow, I'm Atma Brahman. It's something which I don't really know what it is. Something beyond. Let's move with it. Don't get stuck with the world. Let's read it.
Living in solitude, with intellect fixed in the highest ideal, mind and body attuned to it, the seeker becomes self-sufficient. Relatively freed from the world, he naturally tends to dwell in solitude, not that he detests company, just that he does not need it. Eating but a little. As a seeker advances spiritually with intellectual conviction and determination, he tends to indulge less in sense objects of the world, even eats less. Eating here has a wider connotation, covers intake of other sense objects besides food. Thus, eating but a little implies regulating his eyes and seeing colour and form, ears and hearing sound, nose and smelling odour, etc. His introverted nature checks his external indulgence.
So just the key word regulating. Eating but a little doesn't mean having nothing. Often mistaken in spiritual pursuit. It's a regulation. Each person's need is different. So it's not to say it should be this or that. Intelligent regulation. Solitary, living in solitary doesn't mean you're not with the people, or it's not you're in the crowd or out of the crowd. You're mentally with something higher. Next one. Speech, body, mind control.
A seeker keeps his action and perception, emotion and feeling under control of his intellect, essential to a seeker for the practice of meditation. Without control over senses, speech and mind, one ought not to plunge into meditation. An ill-prepared mind cannot meditate.
So when you look at this, speech, body, mind control, if you just look at, you turn on the news, it's always gossiping about something or a negative thing going on. It can consume you. So it's the regulation of whatever you put in, whatever intake of stimuli you take, or whatever you put out, regulate it to directing it to something higher. Let's go. Tim.
Everyone,
Sam.
Sorry, just a quick one. I think the speech is also a good one, because sometimes, like we talk to friends and they might say something, or we might even say something that's not necessarily helpful, like in terms of our spiritual. So I think that's something that I contemplate on in terms of what I allow others to talk to me about, or what I hear. But I wondered what you think about the body, because it says speech, body, and mind controlled.
Mm-hmm. So if your body is, craving, your body is craving indulgences, that's one aspect. If you don't keep your body in check, fit, your body will need certain things. You'll disturb you, number one. Also, your body, once you stop feeding, your body, or your body focus, that becomes an obsession. You've constantly focused on the physical. Like if you see people with the amount of jewelry they need to put on, or it's adorning their body, or the tattoos they need to have. You know, it's your choice, whatever you want to do. You might have different reasons, but it becomes body focused and doesn't allow you to think about others, because your time's been consumed on your clothes or your outward layers or what your presentation. You should look presentable to another. So you should make that much effort, but it's streamlined. So body control
makes sense. Yeah.
So always on the bottom. If you overindulge, you'll become like this. Then you have to put up with that. You know, it bothers you everywhere you go. So that consistency of that consistent exercise is part of your spiritual path. So then you don't think about your body. You know, you can keep your mind off it. But when something's going wrong, you think about your body all the time. So it's that discipline on that.
Thank you.
That's the next one. The next one. Ever engaged in yoga of meditation? Yeah.
Ever engaged in yoga of meditation? An introvert on the path of knowledge constantly engages his mind on the thought of self, not just in the seat of meditation, but all day long. A true seeker is ever attuned to self while he perceives and acts, feels and thinks in the world. A practice known as open eye meditation.
So to get to this stage, you need to sort of like practice in your own build-up of self-knowledge, reflection, so that it becomes a natural course of things. Doesn't matter where you're at, who you are, wherever it's at, you start there. You take the advantage and the privilege that I can think about this now. We're all at different places and stages, but we get this opportunity. In our sadhana, that's the privilege. Next one.
Endued with dispassion, a seeker pursuing knowledge of self drops extrovertedness. Has no attraction. Actually, has no attraction for his world. Does not involve himself in mundane affairs. He develops dispassion.
So, you know, when you realize that it actually I don't have any value for that any longer. Once you were running after it, and then you think, do I really want that? Not really. So slowly the whole world becomes, is that really of interest to me any longer? When you've got yourself on some bigger thoughts, those things fall away. You put yourself in, you give yourself a perspective. And sometimes we're forced into that perspective. So take good advantage of it when we are. Sometimes the cause and effects pull you out of the world and give you that space in your life. So it's when you get that opportunity, take advantage. It might be when you're sucked into the world of all the things going on, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, then you don't get time to think about it. But when you're pulled out for whatever reason it may be, and take advantage. It's the best thing for you, for your own. It might seem like a disadvantage. Turn the disadvantage. In every difficulty, there's opportunity. Let's go.
So,
And just coming back to Sam's point about body, control of the body, is it also the converse that maybe you're an expert at surfing or a very skilled cricketer or a tennis player? Does that facilitate or hinder your path to self-realization? It is a very controlled body that is an expert.
What makes skilled and proficient, perhaps in the case you're talking, athlete, is their mental control, which enables them to direct their body to their limits. But so their focus is on that, but it's not on that with the expectation of it. So there's an objectivity in it. If you've ever heard, once again, I mention our dear friend, yes, Vidya said it, Novak Djokovic. And he talks about the playing of the tennis, he's super fit. When he talks about playing tennis, that's not the main important, it's his mental state which is more important. And once they get fixated on the body alone, the mental state of what they're pursuing goes out of focus, so they lose it. And actual fact,
does not one inform the other? If you
yes, but it's mental first, and then physical. See, the subtle controls the gross. If you've got your mental state in check, you're more able to control your physical body and what goes on. But if your mental state's not in check, it will rule. Your body will rule over you and all its ailments.
I mean, I think that's what happened to Djokovic in Wimbledon, isn't it? His mental state was not there, so he succumbed to Carlos. Whereas when he went to the US Open, he came back, he had a better mental state, it's the same body, a few months apart, and he won the US Open against the same Carlos.
And still everybody thought he was going on his way out, and he's been winning still. So his mental state's got back in check. So just look at that. That person is so refined in their athletics, their agility. At that level, you can still make a mistake. Some vasana comes in mentally to knock you off course. It finishes you off. That disruption of I want something, the expectation, it finishes us off. So the body, you're saying, could not the body? So initially, I think your question is initially, your body helps you. Your body helps you in the sense, if you're fit, you're not with disturbances, so you can think. So that's a helpful tip. But if you gain that thinking, you'll avoid the disturbances of the body. What enables you actually, maybe you wouldn't know it, but sometimes if I've come into the class, if something's happened, maybe I ate the wrong things, and you won't know it. One time I had food poisoning. I know where I ate it and what I ate, and I was not well. I came and did the class because I knew that this is much better than that. We can all do that. I'm not the only one who does that. We all do it. And nobody would know the better. So mental state pitches it off. You can do it. But the other way around, when that mental state's not in check, the body will control, seemingly, the mind. Once you get your mind in check, it's the other way around. So athletes, we'll come back to that. Anyway.
Thank you.
There you go, everyone. I think Isha had a question.